there's simplicity on the near side of complexity and simplicity on the far side of complexity. And so what we're aiming for is simplicity on the far side of complexity.
Mark, it's great to see you. Welcome back to the podcast.
Well, it's always good to get an invite back.
Oh.
So thank you.
Well, I love our conversations. The last time we were on, we took a meandering journey into all things about aura rings and all that good stuff about sleep and cold plunges. And yeah, there you are. You're wearing it right there. I'm a big sleep fan. Like, I believe in good quality sleep. Carey Nieuwhof actually told me about that ring too, on it, how the aura ring tracks your sleep and all the things. So,
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
Well, I want to just dive in today, Mark. This conversation, I think, is a long time coming. I think it's a necessary one for this point in culture. And I just want to kind of hit the target for a lot of people stuck in self-defeating patterns of fear and frustration. What's the first step out?
Wow. We're going to hit the ground running.
Yeah, we are. We have a short time together, so I thought, let's just kick it.
Yep. Here's my take, Chris. If you want to change your life, you have to change your words. Like, you have to start by telling yourself a different story. This goes all the way back to cybernetic theory, which has some, there's some debate about that, but first level change, behavioral, do more or less of this or that, and that will have some effect. But conceptual change, this second order change of, you got to tell yourself a different story. I mean, most of our self-defeating patterns start with beating ourselves up. And, I would even put a card on the table right at the front end and just say, the great commandment is not just two-dimensional, love God, love other people. It's three-dimensional. You love others as you love yourself. It's really hard to love other people if you don't like yourself. And so, whether it's leadership starting with self-leadership or storytelling starting with the stories you tell yourself.
Yeah.
Like, these things are huge. These are the game changers, I think.
Okay, so this is interesting. And again, we'll just take the deep dive for sake of time today. You argue essentially, as you said, that the best predictor of success in life, in love, and in leadership is our proficiency with these three words. Folks, lean in, because this could really change your life. Please, sorry, and thanks. Now, that sounds ultra surface level, but there's a lot of science behind this, Mark. Take a deep dive and tell us why.
There is. If you're good at those three things, you're good to go. I'm not worried about your marriage. I'm not worried about your workplace. Like, PhD is great. Go ahead and get an education. I'm all for it. But PST, please, sorry, thanks, is going to get you the promotion at work. That's the thing that's going to differentiate you, I think. Call it emotional intelligence, call it people skills. Nothing opens doors like please, nothing mends fences like sorry, nothing builds bridges like thanks. And so, Chris, people can call me a simpleton, but you know what? Even if you're like, let's pick on professional athletes. What sets them apart is that they're really good at the basics. So I think the people that distinguish themselves in business or any kind of occupation that involves dealing with people, honestly, Chris, it's people who are really good at please, sorry, and thanks. Those are the people that end up getting out of what I think what John Maxwell calls the people pile, but that might go back to I don't think he originated it. But if you want to differentiate yourself, get really good at please, sorry, and thanks. Not for selfish reasons. This is about adding value to other people. This is about checking your ego at the door and really just being about other people. And so I think it's three simple words, but powerful words.
So have we overcomplicated all of the matter around emotional intelligence, social skills, soft skills, even our fascination with personality profiles, etc.? Are we unintentionally overcomplicating things, do you think, as a society?
Oh, I think there's some human nature in that we take the simple and make it complex. I would note for the record that part of the genius of Jesus was taking what was complex, 613 kind of commandments that were part of the warp and woof of what it meant to be Jewish, and reduced it to one great commandment. So, by the way, I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes who said there's simplicity on the near side of complexity and simplicity on the far side of complexity. And so what we're aiming for is simplicity on the far side of complexity. In other words, everything's complicated. There's nothing that's not complicated. In fact, I think what is it? 37 sextillion chemical reactions happening in the human body simultaneously. So we're incredibly complex creatures. But I do think great leaders have a way of going right back to basics and making the simple things the important things.
Will you drill down on that a little bit? That Oliver Wendell Holmes statement, simplicity is on the near side and the far side of complexity. What does that mean, and how are we missing it as we go throughout our daily lives? What does that mean?
Well, I think simplicity on the near side of complexity, let's be honest, that's called ignorance. That's just, you don't know any better. You haven't kind of waded into the weeds of kind of human experience, and you're actually oversimplifying because you just don't know any better. And so, Chris, one of my mantras would be, the more you know how much you don't know. So I think that he who thinks he knows does not yet know as he ought to know. 2 Corinthians 8:2. So I am striving for a simplicity that goes all the way through complexity and then comes out the other side. I think now, and let's be honest, Oliver Wendell Holmes lived a long time ago. So I don't know that we can call him up and get the straight scoop on this, but I think that's what he meant. I think it's about taking all of these complex things and going back to some basics.
So a question sort of burgeons out of this then, Mark. What does it require of us to maintain, to harness a teachable spirit? Because I see that as the linchpin for simplicity on the far side of complexity. Yeah.
And Carol Dweck would call that a growth mindset, right? And there are probably lots of different names for it. I go back to something I read at 21, something that Albert Einstein said. He said, never lose a holy curiosity. So I want to continue to approach life with this holy curiosity. And I'll just throw this one in for free. This is a lot of years of counseling for a lot of different things. And a counselor recently talked about the importance of non-anxious curiosity when it comes to our kids. And I have learned to apply that to all of life. And so, Chris, I have 2 rules of life. I have 100 rules of life, but here are 2 of them. 1, everyone is my superior in some way, in that I learn of them. And that's a tip of the cap to Ralph Waldo Emerson. And then the second one is that everyone's fighting a battle I know nothing about, in that I empathize with them. So I want to have a non-anxious curiosity. And Chris, I would even apply that to the people that get under my skin, the people that kind of I don't understand why you're reacting that way. It's the people that are least like me. can I have enough non-anxious curiosity to peel back the layers of this human library that's in front of me and really have a meaningful dialogue? So I think non-anxious curiosity is somewhere at the core of what we're talking about.
Everyone's fighting a battle we know nothing about. And then I hear you also say how important it is that we maintain a non-anxious curiosity. I'm curious because I love good questions, and I think questions unlock a lot for us in life, Mark. What are the quality of questions that allow us to step into both non-anxious curiosity and then the posture of heart that enables us to see that people are fighting battles we know nothing about? What's required of us?
Yeah. Well, I love the question about questions.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of a connoisseur of questions,
Me too,
Chris.
Mark. Me too.
So I've got a spiritual father who's 81 years old, a guy named Dick Foth, and Dick loves asking this question: who left their fingerprints on your soul? Well, that's a brilliant question. Now we're going to get past talking about the weather and actually have a meaningful conversation. Another example is, and this is so simple, it's just a slight nuance, but I was with a group of guys less than a year ago, and a friend of mine, Jeff Zog, asked the question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing? But you can't say 7. And what he said is 7 is the safe answer. People answer 7 because it's safe. If you answer 8, you have to be doing pretty good and substantiate it. If you're doing 6, well, now we're close to 5. And so I love studying the way that people ask questions. And I would just throw out there that the best question is not a question. It's a follow-up to the question. And it's tell me more.
Yes.
In other words,
that's it.
Like explain that.
Mm-hmm.
Help me understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, can I flip it, Chris?
Are there
any questions that you just kind of always have in your back pocket that you pull out with people? Are there any?
Yeah.
Are there any questions that you just use consistently?
Yeah, whether they're questions or just reframing statements, this is like a counseling tactic. I love to ask questions around reflecting meaning and reflecting feeling. So in conversation, it'd be like, hey, Mark, what I heard you say is... That way the person with whom I'm speaking could go, oh my gosh, that's not what I meant to say. And then I can follow up with, tell me more then. What really matters to you? What it sounds like you're feeling is, oh my gosh, Chris, that's not at all what I thought I said. Instead, this is really what I meant. And then I can ask a follow-up question mark, such as, tell me when that started. What's your story? So those are some of the foundational framers that I use for questions. But I love, like you said, Mark, tell me more about that. How'd that make you feel? What happened?
Can I throw out one more question that I've started asking?
I will write it down.
Okay. So Eugene Peterson was kind of this prolific author, pastor. In fact, he paraphrased scripture into something called The Message. He had 3 portraits that hung in his study, and it was kind of his tip of the cap. A guy named Alexander White, a Scottish preacher, I think, John Newman maybe inspired his philosophy of ministry. But the question I'm loving to ask is, if you were to hang 3 portraits in your study that had the greatest influence on you, who would those 3 people be? And then I usually get people started, and I'll throw them a curveball, because one of mine is George Washington Carver, who, of course, born a slave, had a hard time getting an education because of the color of his skin, but I'm convinced is one of the most curious and brilliant people ever. And of course, he was a student of nature and came up with more than 300 uses of the ordinary peanut. And so George Washington Carver would be one of those three portraits that I would hang in my study. In fact, I have one. I haven't hung it yet because I just got the idea. But I kind of love questions like that just allow for more meaningful glimpse into people's souls.
Okay, so let me reflect that back to you. Why George Washington Carver specifically? When you see that portrait on a regular basis, what does that do for you? What does that inspire in you? What does that motivate you to do, and why?
Yeah. Well, the short answer is I admire the obstacles he overcame to do what he did. But then I would also say, like, his life verse was Job 12:7-8. Ask the animals, and they will reveal to you. Study the earth, and it will reveal to you the secrets of the Creator. And so I think embryology is a branch of theology. And so I love everything from neuroanatomy to quantum mechanics. And I'm not professing to be any kind of expert in any of those. But I think Romans 1:20 that God has revealed his divine nature through what he's created. And to me, no one embodies that better than George Washington Carver. So he's kind of he's my if he had a fan club, like a science fan club, I would have been one of the members of that fan club. So that's why I would choose Carver as one of those three.
Man, I love that. In fact, I want to sort of spring off of that because you said one word that piqued my curiosity, and it's obstacles, navigating obstacles in life. And here's a sort of a wraparound thought to navigating obstacles in life, because when I read your book, Please, Sorry, Thanks, and I'm thinking about the power of our words. Last week I just read Psalm 39:1, and if I'm being honest, it's a direct mandate from the Lord for me right now. The psalmist writes this. He said, I will guard my ways that I may not sin with my tongue. Okay, so many people, many of us right now might be facing an obstacle like George Washington Carver, like you have, like we all have. And there's a challenge to guard our words because words create worlds, as you articulated. So there's the other side of the power of our words. I'll guard my ways, he says, that I might not sin with my tongue. Mark, what's the danger of an unrestrained tongue? What does it reveal about the issues of the heart?
Well, science is catching up with truth that was revealed many, many centuries ago. King Solomon said the power of life and death is in the tongue. And so, in linguistics, there's this constructive theory of language that our words don't just represent the world objectively, our words create the world subjectively. And there are countless studies that could be cited about the power of words, but we all know it anecdotally. All of us have been cut pretty deep by words that hurt, and because of our negativity bias, we tend to remember those words much more. In fact, there's an old equation, Chris, that I don't know who came up with it, but one criticism plus 1,000 compliments equals one criticism. The compliments go in and out of our ears, but it's the criticism that tends to get lodged in our heart. So I think we've got to be careful that we speak life-giving words. I would even argue, and this might go down a rabbit hole too deep, but before original sin, there was original blessing. That sequence is significant. That the very first thing God does is he speaks words of blessing. I would argue that the purpose of language is to pronounce blessing. And if you want to even tease that out, there was this priestly blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his countenance towards you and give you peace. This priestly blessing was pronounced twice a day. It bookended every single day if you were an Orthodox Jew. Now, take it one step further, push the envelope. And if I am reading scripture right, I'm part of the priesthood of believers. In other words, now it is my responsibility and my privilege to pronounce blessing on everybody I encounter. And so, Chris, I feel like we've got to recapture the significance, the power, and the potential of our words. And I would say at the heart of it is I want to make sure I speak words of blessing.
That's really good. I want to stay on the power of words because you cited some evidence in your book from a series of studies conducted at the University of Chicago, because a lot of people could say, oh yeah, our words create our worlds, Mark, that sounds woo-woo, whatever, but I want to drill down on the science of this because I believe Scripture, and I believe the truth of Scripture, that the power of life and death is in the tongue. What else do we need to know, Mark?
Yeah, well, and the sort of quintessence of that study, Chris, was that it wasn't the system of therapy that the counselor was using. So, and I love CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
I'm a proponent of it. I'm a big proponent these days of family systems therapy. A guy named Murray Bowen, who sort of pioneered some of those concepts. I even think Viktor Frankl, like you can pull stuff from, logotherapy, like all of these counseling systems are great. But what the study found was those didn't make the difference. What made the difference was how the person being counseled talked. That how they talked was the differentiator. And so, and isn't it funny that studies have found that if you speak negative words to plants, they actually languish. And if you speak life-giving words to plants, they actually flourish.
No way.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Wow.
there are studies out there that words can create what a little play on words here can create a sonic bloom. That there are studies that cows serenaded with Mozart produce more milk. Now you may, there are always people who are listening where like, give me chapter and verse, and I need to know that study. And I'm not saying that. You have to go and look at these studies, make sure that there's some good statistical analysis and that there's a quantitative measure to it. But none of those things surprise me because I believe in the inherent power of words, that they aren't just words that get interpreted in the auditory cortex, but they're also sound waves. They're a form of energy. And so these things may sound super mystical, but there's a science behind them that I think is pretty well substantiated. Long story short, words create worlds, and please, sorry, and thanks are kind of at the top of that list.
Okay, so persuasion is like the art of inception. Say more about that.
Yeah, no one wants to be told what to do. A person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. So even though I may lead an organization, in this case a church with say 45 employees who eventually ultimately on an org chart report back to me. Chris, I believe that when you reach the highest level of leadership, what it does is it allows you to now wash feet like Jesus. So I just don't think pulling the power card or just telling people to do it to grin and bear it, like that's not going to get us where we want to go as a church culture. And so what I want to do is level the playing field, and I want to ask a genuine please. And when you do that, it puts the ball in someone else's court and allows them to kind of step up and step in. So I think there's a little equilibrium that happens when we ask people to do things, and how we ask them is going to be the differentiator of whether they do it well or not, whether they own it or not.
I think a good place to begin the descent in this conversation today, Mark, and man, I could spend 3 hours with you just on George Washington Carver and just take that deep dive. But I am curious about please, sorry, and thanks, because when we employ them more authentically and regularly, what do you think happens to our pace throughout everyday life? I think we're forced to slow down and become more intentional with people. I think you sort of just tipped your hat to that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And one of my practices is to keep a daily gratitude journal. And then for what it's worth, my wife and I share our gratitudes with each other when we Sabbath. There's one day a week that we just kind of check out, get off the grid. And so when I take time to write down a gratitude, two things happen. One, I have to slow down and think about it. But two, it turns joy into rejoy or rejoicing. So now I get to enjoy it twice. And so I think there is something about like, hey, let's slow our pace and get a little bit closer to that 3 miles an hour. There was a Frenchman, Jacques Reda, who used to walk the streets of Paris, and he would try to notice one new thing every day. And I've taken inspiration from that. Like, what if we just kind of every day tried to find something that enabled us to appreciate the kind of, I guess, everyday miracles that happen all around us all the time, but really stop and appreciate them.
That's really cool, Mark. Actually, have you read the book, Life in the Five Senses, Gretchen Rubin? I just interviewed her last week.
Really?
Yeah.
I really enjoy the way Gretchen writes.
Yeah. She talks all about that, stopping to notice. She begins the book talking about going to an eye appointment, and then what that really worked in her to begin to notice things in life that she wouldn't ordinarily notice. And so for you to say that just kind of validates the whole point that, folks, we need to slow down and pay attention. Mark, I'll land here today. It's just been a treat to see you and to spend just a few minutes with you. I really respect you a ton. If we're talking about words and the power of words, what's a question you wish more people would ask you?
Well, it's funny that the first thing that comes to mind is a question someone asked me about 25 years ago. If you had to describe yourself in one word, what would it be? And I kind of chuckle now, Chris, at my answer, because my answer then was driven. And I thought it was a good answer. And now, in light of our conversation the last 3 minutes, like, I think living closer to 3 miles an hour is a much healthier pace. I think what's important is asking the question, what has life come to teach me? So, and this is something I picked up from my wife. Has had 2 bouts with cancer in the last 5 years, and she's doing great. We're on the other side. She rang the bell a year ago and got a clean bill of health after doing radiation and all the different treatments. But Chris, it was a piece of poetry that posed that question, what have you come to teach me, that really transformed the way that we walk through that challenge and that journey. So I would just challenge people, you just have to keep learning. Like, life is teaching us stuff all the time. God is teaching us stuff all the time. And I think it was Frederick Buechner who said, listen to your life. In other words, like, you got to learn the lessons that life is trying to teach you. Otherwise, you never graduate to the next grade. So I think that's my long answer to a short question. What have you come to teach me?
Well, I think the length of it, Mark, just again demonstrates your teachability, and it's what I respect so much about you. So, I'd love to just spend even more time with you talking. There's so much to unpack in this book. I was thinking about pathological dualism and all those things, but we gotta hit pause today. But hopefully we can pick up sometime in the future. But Mark, what a joy! Thanks for being here today. I really, really am grateful for you.
Hey, Chris, it's always a joy. Your conversations are unique because you never know where they're going to end up. And that I appreciate. There is a very obvious kind of holy curiosity that we reference very early on that I think both of us we're going to keep learning, or in the words of Ashley Montague, I want to die young at a ripe old age. So let's keep living and learning and keep having these conversations.
It's so good, Mark. It's great to see you. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks.